Welcome. I know that you've been reading The Atlantic, Emily Oster's little op-ed piece saying that we should all now carry on. We should move on and recognize that I don't even think she said mistakes were made. Right? She just said, bless her heart, because I kind of looked her up on Wikipedia and she is a youngin'. She's a youngin', so maybe we can forgive her for. I think she's 42 now. So does that count as millennial? I don't know. We Gen Xers are just so used to being boomed and Z'd and millennialed out, and nobody's paying attention to us. And it's time for us Gen Xers to admit that we knew all along everything, all of this that's been happening. And I could say, how did I know all along back in spring 2020? That indeed we were about to be hit with a giant something or other. Partly because I've been listening to Vox and all of you guys talk on Social Galactic and such. And also because, well, I have, of course, the thing that clearly Professor Oster needs and doesn't have, which is, ooh, look, a crystal ball. Now, if I could simply as a professor of history see into the future so well, was it because I had a crystal ball or because maybe I was thinking about the whole problem differently than she was? We are going to do the archive tonight, check the memes, check the story, and say, in the nicest possible way, we told you so. Welcome to the Mosaic Ark. See, I've got clearly the ability to see into the future because back there, and I can prove it. I can prove it. And to a certain extent on my blog, I knew that back in spring 2020, I would want to have this moment when I could say, yes, I told you so. I saw it coming. It was completely obvious throughout January, February. It was probably, I feel like Vox was starting to already talk about it before that, but it was certainly entirely obvious to me January, February 2020 that something was building to happen. I was teaching in my Eurociv course and we were doing the French Revolution because that's what always happens in the winter quarter of Eurociv. And it just felt like another of those event moments, right? That there's something coming, there's going to be a big event. And so indeed, when everything started playing out with the lockdowns and the 2 weeks to flatten the curve and the masks and we need a vaccine by March or April of 2020, it was so clear that we were in for it. And I can prove it because I'll put all the links on my blog that I was writing at that time. Yeah.
Yeah, we knew.
How did we know? This is so Oster in her Atlantic piece. I did, mildly look her up just a little bit, and she is younger than I expected. I thought she was more like my age, but she's was born in 1980, so maybe she missed a lot. But you're younger than she is. So how did you know?
That's a good question. Third world experience.
Say more.
Well, the reflex. I'm gonna fix my volume. The reflex response in Australia, as it was across the world, was to accept this thing called lockdown as a health intervention policy. And as soon as people started to discuss lockdowns and social distancing, I thought, how is this going to work in East Africa? And then I thought about friends, people that I know that are living there, the conditions that people are living in. And I thought, this is ridiculous. This is impossible. You can't lock down people that are living in the Nairobi slums or on the outskirts of Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, where they're living hand to mouth from day to day. I also found it very curious that the president of Tanzania had immediately suspected that this hypochondriac hysteria was going to be imposed on third world people, and they weren't going to be given the options on how they were going to respond to the health crisis in the most appropriate way for their own population. So that's why I was immediately thinking, okay, something is very, very wrong here. East Africans don't have savings accounts for the most part. And I thought, if there is a woman who's raising 12 children on her own and she's going out to farm seaweed or to work in a cassava fields in order to get enough together to put food in her children's mouths, a lockdown is a death sentence for somebody like this. So I thought, okay, so why is this being recommended as a global solution to infection control? It didn't make any sense for me for that perspective.
I mean, so I'm interested. I teach the French Revolution every couple of years, and there's a kind of arc to the way it's not, hysteria is kind of the wrong word, because there's an arc to the conviction that builds as people get into these moments. And it's interesting with French Revolution because it's another of these cataclysmic overthrows of a society, a social structure that began out of debt. Like the French government cannot pay its debts, and that's why they have to call the Estates General. And it's meant simply to be a reform of the financial system, and it turns into, in the matter of months, right, from May to August, storming of the Bastille and the overthrow of the complete feudal system. The dovecotes are I'm afraid, destroyed in that time. And the things that were happening in 2020 just started feeling like it's one of those moments when every day is going to bring another one of these cascading falls of the house of cards. And I've talked, I think we talked enough about the pharmakeia and the big pharma and my distrust of medicine and such like that, but there was also this, just, I mean, even as we were going in March and it was going to be 2 weeks, I knew it wasn't going to be 2 weeks. I was telling family members, you need to get out of whatever this or that situation you're in, because it's going to be longer than 2 weeks. There's no way that this is simply going to be brief. And the post that I wrote that I'm thinking of in my blog was, one COVID to rule them all, one COVID to find them, one COVID to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. I was also, of course, teaching Tolkien that spring, and it was so clear that this kind of absorption of the world into the fear, one was already wiping out memory. I mean, it's interesting to me reading that post from May 2020, and I'm already talking about how I can't remember what it was like 2 months ago.
Yes.
And sort of, for tonight's stream, we asked, friends in our social media to give us memes, and the memes flooded in. Whatever we do tonight is floating on an ocean of the memes that we selected from. There were more than we were able to put in the slideshow. Well, that we would put in the slideshow. We got a little picky, but this feeling of, wow, it's been 2.5 years. Where did that time go? Where did the it's hard to believe it was 2.5 years. I mean, it was not 2 weeks, it was 2 years. I knew from the beginning it was probably going to be at least this long, and yet I'm still surprised that it's been so long.
I feel centuries old now. It doesn't feel like 2 years, it feels like 200.
Well, we've been through this
Well,
kind of time warp, and this was the other thing with the
yes.
French Revolution. It's like you go from 1789 to 1794, and 1794 was the terror. I hope we're not in a lull right now, and the terror is still to come. Maybe it is. I mean, the people are starting to die suddenly. Suddenly, and we have had to restructure governments. The governments are being restructured, although we're what Marx said famously about history, repeats itself first as tragedy, then as farce. We may be at farce level now, because we're definitely repeating other things that have happened since World War One, and the masking and the vaccinations and the panic that happened in the autumn winter of 1918. And we're also obviously repeating to a certain extent some of the propaganda effects that played out both in World War One and World War Two. But the farce level, I mean, that we ended up with mainly memes thus far for this event. But there's still this, you go from 1789 to 1794, and there's this rupture of time, right? We do this as historians, like, after that it's all, different. And it's not, they're not wrong. I mean, there were people that lived through the terror. Not everybody was executed, tens of thousands for sure, but there were people who lived through it, and they find themselves, they're no longer aristocrats, they're no longer had the social status that they did. Napoleon comes in and disturbs everything and rejigs it and rearranges Europe and emancipates the Jews. Yes. And there's layers and layers already, but just in that the world can change in a very short amount of time.
Yeah, absolutely. It has changed. It has changed here in Australia to a remarkable degree.
What have you noticed? What are you able to notice? This is the problem with if we all have this kind of amnesia, what do we even remember? What have we forgotten that we don't remember anymore?
Well, I've said this before, people here are not even discussing the lockdowns.
Wow.
To me, this is an interesting thing, because for a lot of people, this is quite possibly the most traumatizing thing that's happened to them in their lives. A lot of young people have spent significant percentage of their lives in lockdown in Australia, and yet people are not really discussing it amongst themselves socially. I think there's an incredible pain, and no one wants to touch it. So how it's changed, there is an odd sterility to social interactions now that I find what didn't exist before.
So one, I think you all had, throughout Australia, there are different layers in different states, but you all had a lot more severe lockdowns than I think even, I don't know, California had here. And I think, I mean, I can tell on our social media interactions, not everybody, I mean, even, we've been talking about this in the Telegram chats for the last few days, people not believing you about what it was like, and saying, following Oster's claim, it's like, we should forgive everyone. Mistake, we didn't know.
I think people didn't realize I was going through it as I was on Telegram talking to everybody, because I didn't talk about it very much while it was happening, unless I was writing about it on my channel. But I don't think people really understand what happened to this entire continent. It was like living through the Red Terror. We previously had a federated Commonwealth where all of the states cooperated as though they're one country. In 2020, the states practically declared themselves sovereign political entities, and the governments of each state began to run the states as though they were completely independent city-states. And this seemed to have worked well in America, but in Australia it was catastrophic because we have a very interconnected social system here. I mean, most people will have family in different states. Most people will travel for work in different states at some stage. A lot of rural communities are living where they're their town, village, or their small city is literally on top of state borderlines, and the border runs right through, and they've got to travel across the border for work every morning and then come back home into another state in the afternoon. So when this happened, suddenly people were cut off from extended families, from hospital services, from work, from their neighbors. Just everything was completely interrupted. And for the first time for quite some time, Australians were required to operate as though they lived in a state and not in a country. And they started to talk to us as though we lived in states instead of within the Commonwealth of Australia. And for anyone paying attention, certain states were a little better than others. We had some world-class public health measures implemented, and Australia's got the gold medal for lockdown rates of lockdown anywhere on earth. Like, it was worse than Brazil.
And dogs and I mean horses being raced. You showed me footage from different parts of the country, so I do have seen some of that. But the kind of, I mean, we had the street protests in 2020, but they had nothing to do with the coronavirus lockdowns. They were about BLM, yes. Right? With the irony of, why is everybody out there in these giant street protests, and yes, apparently we can't go to church.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, all the churches were closed. Liturgy was suspended. The priests were organizing liturgies and broadcasting them. They were live streaming the liturgies, but we weren't allowed to step foot on church property for a very long time. So stories from different states and how wacky everything got. At one stage, the Australian state of Victoria, that had decided to lock down everybody, put them in their 8 p.m. curfew with a 1 hour exercise allocation per day per person. It closed every business except for supermarkets and medical facilities, emergency medical facilities. Gyms were closed, everything was closed, but the brothels were open. So churches were closed, brothels were open. I'm not really sure what that says about what constitutes an essential worker or not anymore. I mean, it was like hilarious kind of to anyone who was actually paying attention to those kinds of things, and a lot of people were, they were horrified, because the Christian community just wanted to go to church and pray for everybody to make sure everybody was safe. Right. And of course, a lot of them were quite happy to congregate safely, but they were prohibited from doing this. So I don't really know how you can go and visit a brothel and social distance.
Well, I mean, the social distance, sterile. We also knew from the beginning all of these measures were silly. I mean, yes, the masks and the social distancing and we'll just try everything except for the medicines that people were saying would actually help. I mean, it's like, I don't want to like land too hard on Oster, because everybody has for the last 3 days, and of course, when she let's declare a pandemic amnesty, right? And we have all the headlines and the tweets and stuff that she's put out over the past couple of years. Apparently she got in some trouble by saying, oh, maybe we should open up schools or something. But the claim that, we didn't know, and everybody was just trying out whatever could possibly work at the time. I mean, I've had, um, you know, one of my family members was saying to me, it's like, wasn't it interesting they suddenly had all those stickers to stick on the floors in the airports very, very quickly that all were
Yeah.
6 feet apart. And it's like, okay, so the sort of rollout of the containment measures seems to have been a little smooth for something that people were just trying.
Oh yeah. Oh, they erected permanent street signage across the country in
Wow.
Australia. It's still up.
Yeah.
They're still advertising. No one's taken the signs down, which is bizarre. I mean, I grew up in the generation of graffiti artistry,
Yeah.
where there was no flat surface that was safe, um, and no one's touched them. It's very, very strange. There's this kind of feeling of um, it all being very sacred and hallowed, and you can't touch the signage even though everybody's back to normal. It's
They
just
won't
a
take
very,
the
very
signs.
strange thing.
So the
They're
chat
not taking the signs down, no.
the chat is asking Mike 1000, what made Australia lock down so hard? I mean, this is the Oster is here in the States saying, we were just trying, we were innocent, we didn't know it was this, this massive uncertainty. But did it feel like it was out of uncertainty in Australia?
No, 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 it didn't. If it was a feeling of uncertainty, they would have seen what they were doing to the population and stopped.
Yeah.
I posted on this the other day, as you know, and I said that I'm not going to blame the government because it's not the government's fault, which is going to piss everybody off. It's not the government's fault. It was the bureaucracy that did it. Public servants absolutely got behind the most draconian, anti-social, anti-life interventions you could ever imagine and refused to bend with any degree of elasticity, even though it was destroying people's lives. It wasn't a whoopsie, like, oh, whoops, we just don't know how to contain this little virus. I mean, imagine being a boring person stuck behind a desk job who never has any power, and then all of a sudden everything you say has effect on everybody else around you. That's what happened in Australia. We have very egalitarian culture here. And there isn't anything like an acknowledged class system in this country. We've never really had aristocracy. I mean, we've never had a kingdom, even though we've got a royal as a sovereign of the Commonwealth. But in terms of the way that things work here, convict attitude's always been very anti-authoritarian. So we don't really like it when people are, they get too big for their boots, or like we don't like tall poppies. We have tall poppy syndrome.
Right.
So even if someone is a multi-millionaire, they keep it very quiet. We don't really like people ordering everyone else around based on status. What happened in COVID was like, I think, unrealized desires for some kind of social hierarchy that people have been denying exists for a long time.
That is very interesting.
Yeah,
that is very interesting.
Yeah, because it was like plebeians and patricians.
Yeah.
It really was. And then the equine class, which is always forgotten about in Rome.
Mm-hmm.
I like the equine class. But the police horses were the equine class.
Well, they are. They're knights. And yeah. Very good point.
Yeah, and they were the ones that were sent out to stifle any kind of public protest to any of the lockdown measures. So why things got so crazy in Australia, I really think that the people here were hungry for some kind of hierarchical and authoritarian approach to ordering everyone else around that they can't admit to. They can't scratch the itch. And they did very much scratch that itch. People were crying, setting themselves on fire. People immolated themselves, 2 separate people, in one state. I know several people drove their cars into the ocean off piers. What else happened? So I can't even think,
Well, so
like,
this
I
is
can't even remember it
that I
all.
started saying that I could tell this was coming because I was studying the French Revolution.
Mm.
And what I described to you, what happens in 1789, that summer, it's like they have this election to bring the Estates General together, which is, you know, the representative government in the old style, which they haven't done for 150 years or more. And
Okay.
they have to elect the representatives of the clergy, the representatives of the nobility, and then the estate, the third estate. And you know they go through this big, you know, process of electing their representatives. They end up with a lot of lawyers. um,
Mm.
and they all come, the delegates all come to Versailles, and they're meeting in the royal palace in different rooms and so forth. And you know, by way of different things that happen over the course of that summer, including, you know, the storming of the Bastille, which is complicated and odd, and heads on pikes and stuff like that, they get to this point in August when they're hearing about all these riots and food shortages and, you know, breakdown of order and such out in the countryside. And on the night of August 4th, suddenly all of the delegates, by now they've reconstituted themselves as something other than those three estates, but they all come together and the nobility start giving up their titles to privilege.
Mm.
Right, it's like the effervescence of the night of August 4th is one is usually described as not the storming of the Bastille, but this night of August 4th is the origins of the true revolution, which is the overthrow of this social structure that they weren't even aware of being. There had been, you know, protest against what was the third estate, and, you know, what was the nation, and questions about that before they convened, but nobody was planning on completely, you know, overturning the entire social structure. And
Okay.
what you're describing is, it's almost, it's like reverse. It's like we ended
Yes.
up with this incredible equalitarian social structure, which indeed makes people unhappy for different reasons. Let's
Yes.
explore this. Madame Defarge, the original Karen, Casey. Well, and she's fictional thanks to, you know, Dickens, but yes, Madame Defarge sitting there knitting the names into her knit. I only remember that from Tale of Two Cities. Um, there's something about, it's like we have just witnessed some kind of reorganization of the social hierarchy.
Yes.
That makes
Very much so.
sense. And we're watching it with like the overthrow of the institutions of trust in science, in academia, in not so much in business. I'm not sure where we're going with that one. The academics like Oster, we you know, they kind of blew it because
Mm.
they were too confident in their statistical crystal balls and not students of enough history.
Well, we had the most obvious distinction made between the different classes, which was the essential and unessential workers. So that was the first step
Yeah.
to the segregation. Telling people that they were unessential for over a year. I mean, imagine the psychological effect
Right.
on being told you're unessential to an entire society. So, again, I'm not really sure exactly how many of the international audience here understand exactly how things dipped from first world conditions to third world. The food banks in Australia were almost completely overrun with demand after the first 6 months of 2020. The lockdowns and the destruction of an open economy and the introduction of the essential economy, it flooded the food banks to the point where they had to close because they were told by police that it was no longer safe for them to operate openly on the street. Yeah, as one example, so already they'd created this very foreign sense of poverty because Australia has never really seen it before. real poverty, like old world poverty, third world poverty. They've never seen it. Suddenly people were hungry. And yet the decision makers behind all of those kinds of mandates, they did not relinquish their decision to continue preventing them from working to feed themselves. So when I see the Atlantic article, you know, Ulster saying, "We didn't know. Whoops, we're sorry."
She doesn't even say we're sorry. I mean, that's
yeah.
it's extraordinary about that. It's saying we were. I mean, her strong claim was we were operating in conditions of uncertainty, and nobody knew.
Well, the food bank knew. We were very certain that people were starting to starve. That's not a condition of uncertainty. This is where I think the memory loss becomes so dangerous, because people don't actually understand exactly how much of the social structure was completely destroyed,
right?
And very, very quickly. So the food banks knew, and then of course different charitable organizations, they understood it. And then the national mental health telephone lines started to report that their call intakes had gone up, and then they started to report that the people that were calling them, their age had started to go down. They were getting calls from children. Then they started to report the statistics of all of these children that had started calling suicide hotlines to tell everybody that they were harming themselves and they needed somebody to talk to them because they wanted to murder themselves. And when that was reported in mainstream publications, people still didn't discuss ending the lockdowns.
Yeah, this is as we're talking about this now, I'm thinking, yeah, we just lived through this. We know what it was.
Yeah.
I knew how it felt. I was saying I knew from March 2020 that it was going to take longer than 2 weeks. But nothing of the, I mean, and they're claiming it was all about the disease, propagation and worrying about, but we knew it wasn't. I mean, it's like there's an interesting story going around now that I've seen a lot in the clips that come through our university clip service, that that acquired immune deficiency syndrome is actually genetically developed out of in the European populations because of the effect of the Black Death. Like, are you? Excuse me, are you kidding me? Right? It's like, oh, we're gonna look. I'm looking for the chat is going to be entertained by this, right? Whatever happened in the 14th century in Europeans developing immunity effectively to the Black Death is now going to start issuing itself in the development of acquired immune deficiency syndrome. Way to pretend that you didn't just inject people with something that might have that effect. Oh no, we're gonna have to
hurt my brain.
I know, we're gonna have to pretend that it's actually medieval.
It was a Dark Ages problem.
It was the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages brought us, like, no, the Dark Ages was 2 years ago when you were suddenly and I want to, like, I really want to get into this. What did we feel happened to society over the course of all of this? Because we were constantly being distracted and deflected with the statistics and the numbers and the the counts, and everybody knows all of us have been watching all of the way the charts changed. At first it was deaths, and then it was cases, and then it was who knows what, right? It's no matter what, you need to keep the statistical fear heightened. But that,
yes,
and we did also recognize that there's the debt bubble and the countries that are having to deal now with the collapsing of our economic systems and such, and that was there. But what you're describing is the ground level willingness to participate in this and what that meant for this whole social structure.
That's where I focused most of my attention. After a while I had to tune out to statistics because I didn't care. because to me it seemed quite irrelevant when I was looking at what was going on in front of my own face. And this is what people stopped doing. They were following the screen. The screen was telling them the stats, the stats, the stats. These are the numbers, these are the numbers, these are the numbers. I was looking at my country, which now feels like a foreign country. And, you know, I always make the joke we got deported in 2020 and they just didn't want to admit it.
Which arc did you get set on? I mean, I think we do have this arc imagery for what we're doing in the streams here, but this feeling of being in this little subset of people that sort of floated off.
Yep. Yeah. It was like Gilligan's Island, you know? And then of all of these odd, eccentric, disparate people who'd collected together to say, you know, what the hell's going on here? But so you know, you've got the statistical hypnosis, people that are glued to those numbers. Then I was looking around thinking, this place is hell on earth. Do you guys notice that kids are miserable? Like, everyone looks depressed at best, psychotic at worst. People are pushing each other out of storefronts. They were fighting over toilet paper in the supermarkets. Like, just a basic observation of what was actually happening. Nobody was dying in the thing. I haven't seen one body, even though that's what we were presented with way back in 2019. You know, it was like Wuhan, oh my God, the Chinaman is dying in the streets, and it's like there's bodies everywhere, and quick, load them into the ambulances.
That's why the Black Death imagery is so important to me. The chat's talking about, is the acquired symptom set only to be found in Euro populations? Who knows? I mean, I couldn't read that article, but two, I like this. Mike is saying 6 centuries to create the curve. Yeah. It's like, that we've stretched the epidemiological argument to be outside of the band that we were being trained to pay attention to here. But they wanted it to be like Monty Python, bringing out your dead with carts of dead and
Yep. I mean, that's what it was presented as in northern Italy as well. You know, my friends in Italy, they said, oh, you know, have you seen the footage? The nonna, she's being loaded on the trolley and in the hospital, and they're, you know, all these old Italians are all getting loaded into, you know, ambulances. Well, I was thinking, hold on a second. Italians, like Greeks, when they're old, really like going to hospital. They'll call and they'll go to hospital. It's like a day spa, okay? I know this sounds harsh, but it's a cultural thing. I'm going to die, take me to ambulance.
Right.
So there's that. There's also the fact that they're old already. We don't know why they're being loaded in. So I was like, okay, that's what the media is presenting to everybody. It's all these people getting loaded into ambulances and dead bodies on the street. In Australia, nothing. Crickets. Nobody collapsed. I didn't see a single person collapse once of anything. What I did see was a lot of people assaulted in the streets for not complying with orders.
Talk a bit more
I've
about.
Seen a lot of people injured by this.
No, can you? Because I remember seeing, it's like you're talking about the equine class, right? That one. There was that one video of the guy in that white horse that he got arrested, right?
Oh,
he's like,
the hottest man in the country.
Bring back knights and horsemen, yes. But so,
yes.
You know, that we were getting some of the videos of your street protests, and the horses were obviously on both sides of that. Can you describe any of the? Give us a bit more detail on some of what was going on with the guy and the horses. What was going on with the policemen and the horses?
Sure. So, the police force in every single state were instructed to annihilate any people who had decided that the public health measures were actually not only dangerous but potentially fatal to people. they had been, I think, briefed in a lot of cases that this was anti-government protesting, which is why I refuse to pin it on the government. Because this is the rhetoric that's being given now, even in New Zealand. Oh, well, we've got to watch for these people that don't like what the government did with COVID and blah, blah, they're anti-government. It wasn't that at all. It was normal people that realized the bureaucracy had hijacked their ability to have any say in what was going on, had started organizing all of these protests that were going to be peaceful little rallies here and there. But they were immediately met with armies of stormtroopers. You know, it was like Star Wars. You know, you could hear the music in the background, dun 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 dun, just like insane use of force, very early, very quickly. A lot of police officers on mounted police officers on giant horses. Now, Australians are not an armed population. They're also very relaxed in the sense that we don't even have soccer riots here. You know, it's not like in Europe where you got like a bunch of drunk Englishmen and the football team loses and they're running through the streets like smashing statues or nothing. Like we have no culture whatsoever of giant outbursts of public violence. So suddenly groups of families with small kids were facing lines of mounted police officers on enormous horses. Enormous horses.
There was that one woman, was that in Australia or Canada where that woman in the cane was trampled? That was in Ottawa, wasn't it? That was in winter.
Yes, we had tramples here. Yeah. People were also trampled here. You know, from the perspective of a lot of us that were sitting down and looking at this, we thought, hold on, this is inappropriate use of force. There is no threat here to public safety. Because if you were actually scared of getting infected by something, you would stay inside. You would not go and meet the infected super spreaders in the streets. Right. You would all stay inside and avoid the contagious vectors or whatever the hell that they'd been reclassified as.
I'm having so much trouble as we're talking about this, feeling like it was real.
Yeah, it's
so interesting.
It's strange. Well, because all of these Aussies rock up and then they're met with an enormous show of force, suddenly they're realizing, hold on a second, we're now in a kind of combative mode against our own police force. Whereas previously, we've not had these kinds of street protests. Even with incredibly large demonstrations, things like, the Iraq war protests that happened just after September 11, when a lot of people were saying, no, we do not want to go into the Middle East again. Right. We're done with Uncle Sam. Please don't involve us anymore. We never had these kinds of violent kind of interactions. So once they brought the horses in and the stormtroopers, who were completely de-identified, they'd removed the human presence even from the political protest situation. We were no longer dealing with humans. The bureaucracy and the force had started to even speak about people as super spreaders, right? They're not human anymore. And the super spreaders were not even allowed to look on the face of the officers that were trying to disperse the groups or push them down or whatever. So everybody was dehumanized. So I was looking at this thinking, oh my God, this is going to escalate. Once you've taken away the human element in these situations, it's over, it's done. People are not going to be rational. To the credit of the Australian people, they retained their rationality even though they were given absolutely no reason to. But a lot of these rural people saw this and thought, well, okay, if they're going to use horses against unarmed civilians who can't fight back, we'll come and join the protest with our horses. So that's where you see sexy horseback guy who was like, they can't get all of us, and riding across the border.
But again, so this is a problem for historians, because when you read, again, I'm going to keep the French Revolution as an example. When you read about how these events happen, I mean, it's a challenge for historians to imagine why people got so caught up in it. It's like, how do you, I mean, Madame Defarge, right? How do you end up with the French setting up in the middle of their major city,
Yes.
a place of execution where they, on a daily basis march people to the guillotine and chop their heads off? That is like, I mean, it's up there with the Aztecs, making their mounds of skulls and things like that. And you're saying,
Yes.
how do you get there? And that, we're constantly being told that we have to beware of becoming Nazis, right? But over and over and over again, we could feel this, the willingness of, and you're making a distinction that I don't think I understand between the government and the bureaucracy, and some of the chats wondering about that as a problem. But if you could, but there's the sort of,
I'll make a distinction.
Who is actually behaving how in all of these situations? Because the French, it is the sort of Tale of Two Cities sort of version of the women sitting there, the tricotés or whatever they are, sitting at the guillotine, watching the daily executions of the enemies of the state. I mean, like,
it's total war without frontiers and dehumanization.
But the thing is, the point about the French Revolution, it was all very bureaucratic. Yeah. They had constant meetings about all of this. They have one of the texts that we use for the courses when they're debating over. They've captured Louis, who was trying to flee and was in fact trying to organize counter-revolutionaries against them with the monarchs of Europe and so forth. They capture him, and they have these long debates about, first, whether they can have a trial, and then whether, when they have the trial, whether they can, should they execute him or not. And they're sort of weird discussions, because they're clearly going to kill him no matter what, but they have to make sure that they vote correctly for it. The kind of, it's this, the bureaucratic, assembly level democratic insanity of procedure. You're going to go through all of the correct procedures.
Oh yeah, yes. Well, procedure's not human; it's mechanical. I mean, this is how they assuage their guilt, and for being complicit and for colluding in human destruction. Because you say, okay, I was following orders, I was following the procedure. We did everything in a committee, so it's okay, right?
Right.
If it was rape by committee, would it be okay? People in these bureaucratic mindsets tend to get into this headspace, which is why I'm saying it was a bureaucratic tyranny and not a governmental tyranny, because our members, our members of parliament, they're the government. They've been elected. We haven't elected the bureaucrats. They're just there.
Okay.
Our elected members of parliament did debate. They debated publicly. Some of them were obviously absolutely satanically determined to hold on to that COVID ring of power at all costs. Others, they stood with their people. But that's what I'm talking about in terms of like blaming the government. That's your elected parliament in terms of how it works in the Commonwealth of Australia. To blame them, you can't. If they give an order to the bureaucracy that's illegal, the bureaucracy has a legal obligation to refuse it. So we were all given immoral and illegal orders. I think the maxim in law is, the precedence of what's permissible by law is that if something isn't constitutional, by definition, it's illegal, and therefore you can't enforce it, because if by enforcing that law you're breaking the greater law, then what you're doing, you can't do it. Right. So Australians sort of forgot this because everything became about process and procedure instead of thinking, hold on a second, are we operating by rule of law? Which which in my mind, now that's the rational process, because law and the rule of law requires rationality and an understanding of the human being as a whole, complete person, not as a unit that can be shuffled around in a kind of mechanized industrial factory system. The bureaucracy here spoke about everybody in that numeric, statistical, industrial,
Right.
and process, assembly line way. And so when everyone started to think about everybody else like this, well, that's how suddenly everybody started to get very scary. Because it's not people that aren't following mandates, it's potential numbers.
It's potential numbers, right? It's like it's the statistics of the death that have to turn everybody into numbers, which
yes, de-identified. Yeah, they were matriculated. I don't know if that's the right word. It's probably not the right word. But as I noticed how people were talking about things here and how people were talking about their own friends and family, like it split entire households in Australia. Right. There are people now that are not talking to each other. I mean, there are a lot of people now I'm not talking to, or they're not talking to me. It goes both ways. We may never speak again after what's happened. It's a kind of Rwanda level hush-hush about everything that happened, but essentially it was a tribal kind of element to it as well.
Well, it certainly had. I mean, in the States, we had. I mean, families got broken up in the same way that happened in the Civil War, in the sense of, some people would be saying that this is nuts, and the other people could say, no, you must do this, otherwise grandma's going to die. But I like what you're getting us to. So the chat is interesting. Samuel H. Bureaucracy is evident here in QLD, Queensland, where the chief health officer became governor. Yes. Queen King's rep. Mike is saying wearing masks aided in the dehumanization. Yes, I mean we yes. the memes. Yes. So what I'm recognizing is when we collected the memes, which I'm showing as we're talking, is like all about the vaccines and the tests and the nonsense, and I mean we in this community were always pretty clear that something else was going on behind the. I mean, there's the physical medical shenanigans that they're playing, and to the degree it's depopulation or whatever, but what we're trying to express now is the feeling of how it never could have happened if the people hadn't been going along with it.
No.
And
no. Everybody that chose to mask that didn't need to helped it to happen.
Right.
And that's because suddenly there were no faces, which means there were no people. There were just masked blobs. It affected everybody's psychology to only see this for the best part of 2 years.
Yeah. And
then when I would walk around, obviously unmasked, because I have legitimate medical reasons for never having worn one.
You have legit. I mean, yeah, you're human. I mean,
exactly. Yeah. It's a religious requirement for me to breathe. The nervousness was unsettling.
Well, I was always very focused on the masks because people's eyes always looked afraid. There was, I mean, it's like the number of the conversations I had with people, and I might be being me, and therefore they maybe have reason to be nervous, but it felt to me like they'd be afraid no matter what, right? That there was just this fear behind the mask, and
even if it's not a fear of infection, it's a fear that they're going to catch refusal.
Right.
To be associated with somebody who refuses. That's dangerous in French Revolution conditions.
Oh, yeah, I think I said something at some point about, we're all wearing the cockade now. I mean, whether you have to wear the mark that you're one of the sans-culottes, you have to wear the mark that you're with the Republic, you have to wear the mark that you are. So it was so the meme that we have up now, I don't know who Destiny Gentry is. It wasn't the suicides, it wasn't the mental health, it wasn't the struggling families, it wasn't the domestic had a movie violence. It wasn't the developmental delays. It wasn't the closure of businesses. It wasn't the extreme poverty. It wasn't the side effects that finally shut it all down. It was the polls. That's why they're lifting the mandates. Their polls were down. That tells you all you need to know about politics. But the thing is, it's right in that it's the polls, but it's still this, to this day, mystery to me why the more people didn't start responding to just saying, I'm on campus and wearing. I have one of the masks that I wore when I had to be like in the hallways on campus.
Oh, I love that one.
I got 4 of them in different colors, and they were actually, technically true masks, right? Because they have a back on it. And but what was, this is a slave mask.
Mm-hmm.
And although because of the beads and stuff, it prevented my face from being fixed, right? I recognized that having the movement on in the beads was actually helpful. So it meant that whatever I was doing, I was still alive, whether as opposed to fixed, that flat fixed face that you get when you're covered.
Yes. I think like maybe particular people were worried about political polling. But everybody's worried about the social polling.
Everyone's worried about that.
And I don't understand why everybody's worrying about a social credit system. It already exists.
Well, it kind of always has, right? It is society. It's will you stand out against what absolutely everybody else in the group is doing?
Yes. So to see someone unmasked, there was no consideration that, perhaps I'm standing next to somebody who, for whatever medical or biological reason, can't be wearing one of these things. It was, oh God, you're one of them.
Right.
And fury, absolute instant fury at any of us that were seen to be carrying this, the real infectious disease, which was a refusal to take orders. So,
but I think it wasn't even, you're pointing out, it's not even always orders. So right now what I'm showing is the signs that I have for our prayer group on campus now, which I'm saying we're the control group. And even though they've taken they took the mandates off that we have to test weekly if we're not registered in their system as vaccinated. And I said, the small numbers of people, one day we're going to get, the crowd. No, it's like I never got a crowd. I got, people now that this is what I am, continuing to worry about. And you're worried about, it doesn't matter that the mandates are gone now, because the human tendency to bring them back is still there. And we were fighting about this in my chat, which is how we ended up deciding to do this particular stream tonight, rather than some others that we are equally explosive that we could actually still talk about. Wondering why can't we just forgive everyone for making, socially forcing everyone to go along by shaming them and making them feel uncomfortable. Just like, because this is, I kept wanting to say, it's like, well, how does a Christian do it? Because this is how Jesus ended up crucified. The crowd goes along with it because they're, the various levels of which is it. But, how do you end up with, now I've got the one COVID to rule them all ring up. This is my one meme, and it didn't show back up in I'm sorry it didn't circulate widely enough for it to come back around to me in my trawling today. The way Sauron ruled was wanting to control others' wills, but the control of the wills is completely in your own. That's quite literally the one thing we have that's free is our choice.
Yes. People wanted to control other people's breathing. And now that's a scary thing for somebody to admit to themselves. Like whether or not this Atlantic article author really has had a moment to think about this deeply. But for 2 years, everybody had the power to control and regulate another person's breath.
Yeah. It's
satanic. And if there is any kind of moment where people are able to sit down and think about exactly how addicted to that they, they were, they have to go through that wonderful hall of mirrors of looking at their own sadomasochistic tendencies, which a lot of people haven't gone down that hole, and probably never will, because it's quite dark to admit that you're capable of doing that kind of thing. So again, it's like, oh, it was a mandate. It's a mandate. We're policing the mandate. We're enforcing the mandate because it's the rules, because this is what everyone needs to do. And don't you want to keep us all safe? Instead of just really understanding the hold on a second, you've got control over my intake of oxygen. I mean, even slavers, like buying Bantu Africans out of the Congo and taking them onto boats, never had that level of control over their own slaves.
Well, that's why with the belly dancer mask, supply. Right? That's the harem, the women, the slave women of the harem. I mean, Casey is saying, I was screamed at in the street when maskless. Mask hole. This was from an elderly woman. I mean, and I'd say women, of course, we are the ones that make society work. The Karens work on both sides. But we're also the ones that hopefully can break out of that and say, stop it.
Well, I was really disappointed in the prostitutes. Personally.
That's going to end up in the clips.
Yeah. I want a better quality of whore. I was really disappointed. They make good money. We all know they make good money. They're independent, ran businesses that didn't close down a single day. Oh. They were politically protected by the state. Because, of course, that's kind of a thing in one of the Australian states. They had their profession authorized as a profession, right? They were in a great social position to stand up and say, what the hell are you doing to your people? With nothing to lose. It's not like they're going to lose business. Nobody's never going to want, oh, she's got the wrong political opinions, I don't want to have sex with her anymore. Come on. Like, do you know what I mean? No, they had zero risk. None. You're already a whore. What are you going to lose? And yet they didn't say anything. And one of the politicians in the state of Victoria is an ex-prostitute. And she was one of the most ardent and unfeeling enforcers of all of these mandates.
Okay, there's a clue in
the
there.
Whole country.
There's definitely a clue in there of what's going on.
Tell me.
I need to think about it because brothel, Silent Draco, brothels are our parliament, but on the other side of the blanket. I'm continuing. It's like as we're going, I'm going through the memes, and here's Christ being crucified. I have a family to feed. He didn't do what they told him to. If I don't do this, I'll get fired. I'm just following orders. My boss told me to. I have to think of my future. Right? That's a classic. It's a modern picture showing the crucifixion, but it's a classic medieval understanding of, our sins did it. But the sins and the excuses that people keep making. I mean, and I know, and I wrote about this, I remember it, I've lived through it. I am really upset that the feeling of what we were fighting has dissipated. Because I know it's not gone. I know it's still somehow out there and can be activated again.
People need to understand what they've done to the younger generation. I think that's where it's going to come from. It's the only way. It's the only way I can see everybody pivoting from complete denial and getting activated again.
But this woman, the woman who did the Atlantic article, it seems she has children, and two, in her own mind, had been standing up for the children, even though now she's trying to say, oh, we need to move on and not be blaming everybody. I mean, you and I, whatever we're saying right now, is we need to understand what we just witnessed. The quote civilization go through. I mean, it's interesting with Jesus's crucifixion because, of course, that was the peak of civilization in the period that he lived, that he became incarnate in. It's like, you know, this world empire surrounding the Mediterranean, the most, you know, advanced law and tech and communications and, you know, arts and crafts and government and so forth. I mean, the Romans are otherwise, except for when you're reading the Gospels, the Romans are greatly admired for their engineering capability and their government structures. And, you know, even some parts of Europe still live under Roman law in various forms. And, you know, we pray with Latin, for goodness sake. And it happened then too. So this, you know, civilization is no guarantee of its own, you know, ability to withstand its own barbarism. And you know, I think maybe that's where we want to go with this. You know, I'm bugged by her claim that we should forget about it because I don't think we understand what happened. And she has this, oh, you know, we don't want to repeat history kind of thing. And I'm like, we don't understand. We certainly haven't. And I think some of this is starting to come out gradually. We're far enough away from World War II that people are starting to wonder, have we told the full story properly? They're elements of things that we've never looked at, that we haven't considered as problems, and they were too horrible for people to consider immediately after they happened, and they're still not capable of looking at them now because they may show us things we don't want to see.
No one sees themselves putting on a uniform and trampling children in the street. I don't know. It's just it's a crazy thing to describe. I see people here very differently now. There were parents with prams, you know, little like wheelie pushy things that you put your babies in, and they were running from semi-armed police officers, you know, during those protests.
And you were
got pepper sprayed
mandates, right? You're protesting vaccine mandates.
It was the lockdowns. The majority of the protesting that happened in Australia was against the lockdowns, because the lockdowns were indefinite. There was no end in sight. They kept letting everybody out, then announcing another one, putting everyone back inside.
But I mean, no. But you were saying nobody was dropping dead in the streets, and people, you'd have those big street protests, and you wouldn't have another Black Death. I mean, we had never had any Black Death. There was no Black Death. No Black Death was involved.
Yeah. No, it was the numbers. The numbers say we have to go inside. We have too many cases, so the numbers were too high, or we're expecting another surge, so we need to circuit break. They called it a circuit breaker. I mean, it was a soul breaker. So there were all these parents at home that had been homeschooling their kids, which wasn't the case, because they weren't free to do whatever they wanted. They had to be on a laptop all day, every day, for over a year.
Do you know? I mean, those everybody watching, you know, like, there's a number of you, right? It's really hard to stare at this camera and sit within this frame and perform for this. You know, it's like you're sending your soul attention down a fiber optic cable. It's you're minimizing yourself into this photon. Yeah, it's actually quite stressful.
Yeah. They did it for
stressful.
They did it for 6 hours a day for over a year. And this is with no social contact, no physical contact. I mean, it's a kind of deprivation. You know, you look at the I compared it to the story of those Romanian orphans, you know, during that kind of weirdness in Romania, and they held all of these kids that had been adopted and put in these orphanages. So their basic needs are taken care of, but they just don't have the love vitamins and, you know, the human touchy-feely stuff. They all end up because they've been deprived. So all of the kids in Australia are going through some kind of similar situation where they're being deprived of things that are basic psychological and spiritual nutrition, and losing their minds. So the parents say, okay, well, we can't handle it anymore. You have to stop the lockdown. So when people are looking at footage of protesters in the street, running, being chased, being they were hunted,
Mm-hmm.
basically. I mean, there were helicopters in the sky patrolling suburbs all across the east coast of Australia, making sure that people were not out disobeying the lockdown mandates. But this is the reason why people were in the streets. They'd done over 12 months in lockdown. People couldn't handle it anymore.
Okay, and the
nobody
more
was
we talk
listening.
about this, it's like I cannot believe it happened.
Mm.
It lasted so long, right? I guess at the time, what we were being told, we were waiting for the vaccines. Was that how was it that we managed to? And always this terror of if you let the lockdown shut down instantly, the Black Death is going to hit, and we're going to end up in bodies in the street. Everybody's going to drop dead. So during this time, I say, I just spent. It says, so those of you on my social media, my blog know I just spent the last several days with my cat dying. She was dying. 2 years ago, at about this same time of year, first my dog died, and I put her to sleep, so that happened a little faster, but she was dying quite rapidly of a blood disorder, which is kind of weird and strange. And then after that, I went home to my mom's because my stepfather was dying, and there's a variety of things there. One, that my brother and I had to fight to keep my stepfather out of yet more interventions. It's the medical profession is designed to intervene, and the doctors are never designed to say, except for my father, bless thanks be to God, and also the one who gave me the cat that just died. So sort of that doctors are trained to suggest something else. Oh, doctor, what can you do? What can you do? And of course, what they can do is watching my cat die. You can prolong it a little longer, but you're gonna die when you're 18 years old and you're a cat, or when you're 84 years old and you've been in a wheelchair for 4 years with a spinal fluid leak. Right? My stepfather was dying, and my brother and I had to fight to keep him simply in like hospice rather than yet another emergency room visit. Now that's interesting, but it's also very interesting that therefore we were in the hospitals in autumn, winter, November, December of 2020, allegedly in the time when it was all the most dangerous. One, the hospitals were completely empty. There's reports from Texas. We were in Texas. Reports from Paul Joseph Watson just did that video showing all of the TikToker nurses doing all those dances. Oh, we're under such stress. We're under such stress. And it's like, the stress was probably the pretense that everybody was about to drop dead constantly. How they were able to do those videos, I have no idea. But the hospitals that we saw our stepfather in as he was passing, the VA, the emergency room and stuff, they were not overflowing. They were empty. Whole wards were. It's like there was one ward open when I went to the VA to see him as he was dying. So the level of ability that people had to believe the narrative makes it sound even silly, right? To believe that we were in the level of danger that we were. We wanted to be. I think the part is, I think everyone wanted to be. They wanted to feel like they were in a crisis.
You've activated a thought, which I think I'll share, because that'll give you an idea of why I was so level-headed and skeptical about the bodies dropping down in the streets, and why everybody did actually want to believe that it was happening when it wasn't happening. When I was in Tanzania, there was a ferry capsize. They have these giant passenger ferries. They're not giant, but they're getting people back and forth from the islands to the mainland. And like everything else in Africa, it's overloaded. They don't have a capacity limit. It's just what we think it can take, and everything, God willing, will be fine.
We'll all get on it before it starts to sink.
Yeah, exactly. Inshallah, it'll be fine. With zero safety considerations, there's no life jackets. There's like a human pile on top of this boat. And anyway, I forget the year, but while I was there, one of these boats capsized in the middle of the night on one of its like longer journeys across this particular channel of water. Most of the women and children can't swim, and the men can swim.
Mm.
So, well, if they can swim. Anyway, I got a phone call in the morning from a friend of mine who was a doctor there. His wife's a nurse, and they had another friend, another acquaintance of mine. So they're all doctors. So the first thing they get is phone calls that this has happened. He called me and he said, "Do you want to come and have a look?" People can think this is quite macabre, but they were offering me to come, have a look, and also help out because, you know, at the time it was like whoever can help is going to help. There's no emergency services. I said, sure. When a ferry of 2,500 people capsizes, you end up with a lot of evidence of death everywhere. And in a country like that, it's not hidden and it's not, you know, cordoned off. They don't put sheets and things up to hide it from everybody. So can you imagine 2,500 people dying in a single capsizing? I mean, it was obvious that there was a lot of death everywhere. And in that kind of environment, people are much more calm about it than you would expect. Because I think in that culture, they're still very aware of death. It's not kind of tucked away. They live with their elderly. They see the dead. You know, it's just a completely different approach to everything. That's what I was expecting when everybody said, we're being hit with COVID, it's coming, it's going to kill everybody. I thought, okay, this is what it's going to look like. I've seen this scene before. Right. I was in a hospital in Tanzania when a ferry had just capsized, and it was full of people that were surviving or had just failed to survive, partial drowning or whatever had happened to them during the night. So it's messy. There really should have been bodies on the streets, Doc. So
well, I think so. This is good.
Expectation.
One, there's two ways this go. One, the meme right now is Saruman looking at his orc, CDC director circa 2025. Do you know how the Vax first came to be? They were a human once, tricked by the dark powers, injected and mutated, a ruined, terrible form of life. I mean, what Tolkien understood and what the elves actually are proof of is the problem with the desire for immortality. And the Númenóreans, yes. if the Rings of Power had actually done something good with the story and dealt with the lust of the Númenóreans for eternal life, which is why they end up drowning their own land, versus people, I think, and this goes back to what you were saying about the hierarchy and the equalitarian, and that people actually wanted, I mean, looking at those horses, right? You wanted some kind of differentiation in power between normal people and horse people, but you also wanted some kind of it's perverse because you say everybody was wearing masks and getting these vaccinations and such to avoid dying, but what they were actually allegedly but what they were actually doing it in the context of was the kind of thrill that we were in such a dangerous situation that you could possibly die if you didn't wear a mask. They wanted it. I got that sense. I mean, I certainly got that sense talking to some of my family that they wanted that level of potential danger.
They never scratched the itch. There's a lot of people that should have moved to the third world.
Or, see, they're just like, and I say, you know, I'm a fencer. I get, you know, you get stabbed on a regular basis in practice. You know what it's like to have someone, you know, it's like you've got your adrenaline going. Life actually matters because you actually have something to fight. I mean, we don't have enough adventure. We simply don't have an adventure and trial and challenge. And it's, I mean, I think it is kind of that simple. People are bored.
Yeah, I think you're right. sounds really strange, but I'm going through all of the people that were kind of responding to the mandate and to the lockdown and the curfew, the imprisonment. We were imprisoned.
Oh yeah.
I've been imprisoned, which is why, you know, the Atlantic suggestion that we just like give amnesty and forget about it. I mean, imprisonment, it's kind of hard to forget.
Right.
But yeah, a lot of people were bored, and then everyone that was protesting, I mean, we had stuff going on in our lives that we didn't need any additional thrill added on top of, you know? Like, you realize, oh God, this is the only thing that certain people have had to worry about for a very long time. Like, seriously, this is first world problems.
It gave them purpose. I mean, it's a sort of, you know, to follow the protocol. It gives you meaning and ritual and things like that.
Yeah.
But people love an emergency. They always, and when you're talking about the ferry disaster, right? It's like any kind of emergency. Suddenly, one, you know, you have an excuse. This is what I wrote about in the blog, the COVID ring blog post, is it gave everyone an excuse not to do other stuff, right? It's like, oh, the virus, oh, I can't do anything because of the virus. Oh, you know, and that back in 2020, that was all of my colleagues, all of my campus colleagues saying, oh, you know, the virus, and they would be very gloomy when we got on Zoom calls, but I could tell they wanted it that way. They wanted to have something to be terrified of.
Yeah, it's really strange. I just don't.
We need to be chased by tigers. I don't know. I mean, you know, it
maybe
is
that's
true.
It. People need to fence. People need to fence. People.
I will say it's interesting. So Chicago was, you know, I do remember we did have some pretty insane months, right? It's like I couldn't go out to eat for my birthday because, you know, I couldn't get in the restaurant without papers.
It really was
Lori
like
Lightfoot, Chicago. Yeah, the most dangerous thing you can do is dine. No, but it's. You know, it's like I'm showing it here. We got the Munsters. The whole family got the coronavirus vaccine except you. I suppose I'm the pretty blonde now. You know. Here's Kermit getting fat, March 2020, March 2021, and not going out. It's this weird kind of blend of, oh, you know, being afraid to do anything and desperate for something exciting.
Yeah, but it's a contained excitement because it's completely under control.
I mean, yeah, it's like an amusement park, except for when you get crushed, when you're at Astroworld.
Yeah, the roller coaster. Let's go again. Let's go again. Let's go again.
Yeah.
Bitch, we've been in lockdown for 12 months. I'm done with the roller coaster.
Yeah.
Again. Ah!
Yes.
You know, like, oh my God, can you guys find some other form of entertainment for the love of God? You're actually destroying our lives.
No, but there is an adrenaline addiction to this kind of. And so that's why I say, you know, it's like whatever.
Oh, it was junkie behavior.
Oh, totally.
It was junkie behavior.
It's totally junkie behavior. Whatever Oster is wanting to be forgiven for, maybe this is it, right? You were addicted to this. It gave you purpose. It gave you stress. I could see that from the very beginning. My academic colleagues, generically, right? Suddenly, the first thing that happened once the lockdown were declared was we were flooded with emails saying research opportunities around this, you know, particular disaster. It's like if we're ever in some kind of, you know, the next disaster, just watch for the calls for papers. Right? For the conference. Now we're saying they wouldn't need to censor, so we were wrong. Am I wrong? Right? It's like this is, and the sad thing is, of course, we don't like fake life. We don't like watching movies and getting fake adrenaline hits. And going to amusement parks and getting everything. It's like we actually want to be riding horses, and yet we don't, right? It's like this weird kind of schizophrenia is we want to feel like we're in this massive, dangerous, exciting situations, which of course those of us who were standing up against mandates were. Right? I kind of miss it. It was exciting. I didn't know whether I was going to get, you know, thrown off campus from one day to the next. Now I have a little sign that I pray.
You were riding your own roller coaster.
That I pray next to, right? Yes, but I've also been warning
so
people.
funny.
It's like you cannot let yourself get addicted to whichever the most recent thrill was, because then you spend the rest of your life trying to regain it, right? Like if only it was still Woodstock in 1968.
Yeah, I don't need a redo of that. I'm good. That carnival's done. Like I've been on that rodeo enough. We don't need to go there again. Maybe other people want to. I think people are missing it. They are. Like
I bet
definitely
they are.
hear
Yeah.
that. Yeah, they're missing it. But maybe you're right. People have got to admit that they're addicted to it. And then we have that 12 steps conversation of like, first step to recovery is to admit that you got a problem, which means we can't really declare an amnesty because then we're just going to forget that you got a raging, like,
yes,
high on your own supply junkie issue going on. Yeah, which is not good.
That's what so we've got the FDA and drug companies. When it turns out the FDA approved drug causes cancer, oh, it's my bad. They don't want to say, oops, my bad. Even that, right?
Yeah.
Because they don't want it to go away. I think the generic they that we're sort of pointing to, it was too much fun from their perspective. I know it was. I could tell it was at the time. And of course, I got some entertainment out of wearing my belly dancer mask on campus. These, I don't know whether I missed them, but
fabulous.
It was. It had its moments.
I think this is why I like recovering drug addicts. I've really enjoyed Russell Brand's take on this, even though people always insult Russell. I like Russ because, he's a recovering drug addict. He understands addiction mechanisms.
Right.
So it was calming to listen to him talk about it because the way he was describing it, a lot of people, right wing say, oh, it's just like kind of crazy hippie leftist who just like wants, utopian socialism, blah, blah. But no, he saw it. He saw how people were behaving. He described it. It's like this craving that everybody has to satisfy.
Yeah. Australia
had a raging addiction to control mechanisms.
Well, there is so to go back to our French Revolution example, there is a sadistic element here. Sade was imprisoned in the Bastille, and it's as E. Michael Jones tells it, helped make the revolution happen. But there is, whatever sadism is, or what the masochism is, you get off on the threat of the pain and the fear and it's erotic in certain contexts, sort of. But the addiction problem, that's why it hasn't left us. There's all of those structures and mechanisms are still completely exactly where they were.
Yep. It has to be addressed. Because if that, like when they were calling it the circuit breaker, but if that dopamine circuit isn't interrupted with discipline and rationality, there's absolutely no way of being able to measure how people are going to respond if it happens again. Because now, like any other addicted person, their dopamine circuit is already wired to chase the dragon.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah. So this is where I'm sitting here going, all right, you're all acting really normal now, but I saw what you were like in the last 2 years.
Right.
I've seen parties like Travis Scott level. Like, this is why I was comfortable, because I've seen a lot of dead bodies, and I've seen people like collapsing when they're partying and everyone kind of ignoring it, and they continue, or they don't ignore it but they still continue. Like these kinds of situations.
Right.
So I've seen what like really well wired dopamine circuits are capable of ignoring So now I'm sitting around looking at all of my friends and family and neighbors, and I kind of think, okay, so you've been wired for this.
Yep.
Yeah. It has to be discussed.
It really does.
We can't let it go for this reason.
Well, whatever kind
you know,
of,
like,
so the generational problems, right? It's like my parents' generation, they grew up during World War II, so they're wired for one kind of trauma.
yes.
You know, the baby boomers grew up after World War II in the nuclear age, and they're wired for another kind of trauma. You know, me and the Gen Xers were born right after JFK is assassinated and in the midst of the Vietnam War and more Cold War. It's like each of these generations, we have different trauma conditioning.
Yes.
And I mean, so the Gen Xers, we grew up with Watergate going on and nobody trusting the government and they all lie, and cartoons are all interrupted because they had nothing but Watergate trials on all the time. And you know, the sort of, I wonder about the Gen Xer skepticism of things. So we grew up in the moment when you just didn't trust anybody because our parents were having to deal with the you know, disappointment and disillusion of whatever was going on in the Vietnam War. And my dad, right, he served in Thailand. We've all been trauma trained at some levels, and it's going to hit people of different ages in different ways according to the arc that we've lived through. This is why, to go back to you know, Marx and his, you know, history repeating itself, it repeats because the generations grow up, and then you either try to recreate whatever it was that you remembered from when you were, you know, teenager, and you reactivate it. That's what we see the boomers doing, right? Nancy Pelosi never left high school. We see that. She's whatever she was in high school, and she's still at, right, Greece or whatever, you know, Olivia Newton-John. So this is going to be interesting, the playing out of what the children, the high school students, the young adults, the, you know, Gen Xers, whatever we were.
Yes.
We're sitting here going, yeah, right, seen it again. What are you gonna do? Our parents all got divorced. We got like ground zero of certain levels of trauma. Yeah, we've got a lot. This is hardly over, Professor Oster.
Oh, it's far from over.
Far from over. These are souls that have been trained, dragoned.
Well, this is the final thing I can say on that. You know, in our liturgy, this annoyed me more than anything. This annoyed me more than lockdowns and curfews and helicopters in the sky and the cavalry. Our liturgy started to change. We do something in the Coptic liturgy where you do a holy kiss. You do this with other people's hands, and then we do this in the middle of the liturgy to sort of symbolize we're not holding grudges against anyone. We get amnesty in the liturgy.
Right.
So, you know, for anyone who wants amnesty, including the Atlantic article writer, that's where you get it, not anywhere else. But this holy kiss, they suspended. And even now, if I'm trying to do it with people, sometimes I'll get a little bit of a resistance, and then someone will rebut and go, oh, okay, it's fine.
Right.
Because I'm making the invitation to anybody who wants to do it that I personally don't care if I drop dead on the spot. No, I don't care. If I die in church, it would be the most beautiful blessing on earth. But that changed. Then there was, you know, other processes that changed. I'm sure it happened in Roman churches as well. It happened in churches. The liturgical changes were the most annoying thing for me. Because for me, that's like how I get over my addiction, my addictive mechanisms, my own trauma. It's like I have to go there and I have to go through that process in the liturgy, and I have to give it to Christ. I throw my trauma on him. So I was getting really irritated that process for me was getting interrupted. I'm like, oh, it's not supposed to work like that. It doesn't go like this. We do this and we do this. I think, hold on a second. I'm like policy enforcing the liturgy now. Oh my God. Am I Karen?
Yes, you are. You're also over the time that you said you had, and I can.
Oh yeah, I've got to go.
I can stay and talk to the chat for a bit. But Kilts has
All right.
Kilts has
I gotta run.
has an appointment now.
But yeah.
So we always end with like to be continued, and this is totally to be continued. This is not something we can say it's past, it's over. It has transformed the world, and we don't know what we just lived through. To imagine that we can just let it go and forgive everyone, that's kind of irrelevant to the who are we now. I mean, we guess of course we can forgive because we're Christian, but the what have we been transformed into by way of this this event?
Yep. Your circuits have been broken. All right, I really gotta go.
Okay.
Bye.
Chat, I'm still here if you wanna talk about other stuff. I got some more memes. No, that one's boring. I'll cut. So, chat. Buzzsaw Bear, I have no shelves in one of my bathrooms, made a tower on the back of the toilet. I think you guys are talking about toilet paper now. Casey was saying people were hoarding toilet paper enough to build towers in their living rooms. The toilet paper hoarding was that, so, you know, we're still sort of stuck with the supply chain history. I have to let the feed, the stream catch up with what you guys are seeing and talk about. Okay, Buzzsaw Bear, I'm not surprised they let her wear that as a mask. Surprisingly, nobody ever said anything, right? It's like that. This is what was interesting about the mask rules on campus. Was this was perfectly fine, and I actually wore, maybe not that one because it's purple, but I wore a black one that I have to the inauguration of our new president. And again, the staff who saw me going into the chapel with the masked faculty and everything around me tended to just say, "Oh, that looks lovely." So I think it was the performance level, the kind of theater of what we were and who we were was very present throughout this whole experience. So Silent Draco says supply chain issues means people now notice how much industry got offshored. Oops. Yes. we're very much really in there. Casey, the rules were always about control. That's why no one questioned you about its quality. Well, I mean, the thing is, it has the right. I mean, the level of coverage and they didn't care. What they wanted was to make sure that I fit their category of rules, which was wear something over your face. Yeah. So, the mask, that is, yes. Okay, well, so now that Kilts had to leave early, and I'm here for a little bit longer. If you guys want to ask questions, you can ask questions about anything. I don't have stupid questions yet because I'm not practiced enough as Vox is. But what do we want to talk about? I can practice being with the chat for a little bit. I don't think you're focused, Buzzsaw Bear. Masks are great for relationships, then so again are light switches. Well, we did have in the with the images. I still have Kilts smiling at us as she disconnects. Couples should wear face masks during sex, new study insists. And this I did notice in some of the way the done with the jokes. Okay, Buzzsaw Bear. In the memes that people were sitting, I couldn't tell whether they were jokes or they were satire or actual, like this one, couples should wear face masks during sex. Who said that? How could that have possibly been real? Or, here, Gavin Newsom, as COVID-19 cases and hospitalizations continue to rise, 30 counties will now be required to close indoor operations for fitness centers, places of worship, offices for non-critical sectors, personal care services, hair salons and barbershops, malls. How are these real? And, if Lewis says it's, the tyranny of, exercise for the good of its victims, that's what Kilts and I are trying to talk about. It's like, exactly how do we end up again, and Solzhenitsyn can say it all he likes, right? The line of good and evil passes through every human heart. We still haven't dealt with that line, and we only look at it at the degree of like, oh, if you end up in gulags, and oh, if you end up in concentration camps, and oh, if you we did it every single day we went out and did or didn't talk to each other over the measures that were being taken for our own safety, for our own good. Casey, proofs that masochism was an element of voluntary compliance. The sex mask, yes. Bess Bear. Teresa Tam from Canada had the same type of BS regarding relationship sex. You get the idea that maybe they weren't actually interested in the relationships, they were just interested in their own kink, I suspect. Yeah, so this was please forgive and forget, we didn't know. Well, yes, somebody knew, because you were sending dogs and police with batons against people who were marching to be able to go back to normal life. Like, they weren't even trying to go back to, they weren't trying to change the government in any way. They were just saying, can we go back to who we were before you created this fake emergency? So are we still now human? Casey, we still haven't dealt with the trauma of the First World War. Is there any hope? That let's think about that. We haven't dealt with the trauma of the First World War. Back when I was in my first live streaming practice was with Three Craters Symposium, and in one of our episodes we talked with Michael Walsh, who had done a really good book on music and historical change and the diabolic, right, the fiery angel. And he was talking in the book about how in the First World War you lose a whole generation of young men. I mean, it's like the failure of masculinity now. The bravest young men, the ones that volunteered to go from all the colleges as officers, and the men who ended up in the trenches, the ones that end up being the models for Frodo and Sam, right? The courageous officer and his batsman. That generation was cut down. You don't, and they had never have children. They therefore never become fathers, who Tolkien did, and writes us these great stories. But it's Tolkien's writing his letters to his son Christopher, who's caught up in World War II, and you realize how many. World War I wipes out one generation. World War II comes along and like smacks into the ones that were left, and Europe has since then not had a masculine culture to carry on, and no wonder their fathers were all killed. In the United States, we had fewer people killed, directly, and those men come back and I guess start up the 50s and 60s. But whatever happened in the 50s and 60s, I don't think we've dealt with that either from the side of what the atomic bombs really were, either actual weapons or excessive firebombing. One way or another, the Americans have not dealt with the destruction that we caused in those aerial bombardments, and how that trauma fed into when it happens in the 70s, and then we end up with the abortion trauma that we're still living through. Modernity, it's like you worry about whether you're in the Middle Ages. It's like modernity is one layer of trauma after another. Herbert wrote Dune in 1965, and this kind of test: can you stand up against the illusion that your hand's being burned off and not flinch? It's very interesting that's an image from 1965. That's the year I was born. So my entire life has been lived under the Gom Jabbar, I suppose. Can you hear the story about how you're all going to be incinerated in a nuclear blast? Can you hear the story about how your government is not to be trusted? Can you hear which version of can you keep your hand in the box and not flinch have we had to stand up against? Mike 1000, any tips on how to reflect on this time as a period of spiritual trial? Yeah, I do think it was interesting that Dune came out last summer, when they've obviously been filming the movie for a bit, but that you end up with a film about standing up against the drug lords, and yet you need the drugs to keep your economy functioning, right? Whatever the spice is, they need it for the travel, they need it for the leaping that they're making across the galaxy in their spaceships. What we're living through is particular to our own time and very recognizable as the kind of temptations humanity seems to fall into over and over and over again. And that's what our big DCR project is, Draco Alchemicus, which is the trying to show the way the dragon of alchemy, the dragon of the drug trade, takes over the people, and that they surrender to it willingly. Buzz Salbera, best men tricked into war, lest we forget. I'm questioning celebrating remembrance veterans. I recognize that too now, and I've talked about this in other streams where what Mel Gibson was able to show in Apocalypto was the way in which the society sacrifices its warriors. I mean, they capture other people's warriors like a draft and take them to the pyramid and sacrifice them. But that, I mean, most of Mel Gibson's movies are, willingness of the father to defend his family, but with the recognition of what the state is calling upon the soldiers to do, which is die as sacrifice for the government, not for the government, for the social structure. And that we are caught up in that kind of trial now. This is our version of it. This is our Gom Jabbar moment, but it's not like others have not faced a similar sort of problem. Casey's 2021's Doom was magnificent. And Best Bear, I like the old Doom better. Well, I mean, I watched both of them, rewatched the David Lynch one after I saw the 2021 one. They're different and for different moments, and I like the 2021 one very much. But then I read the book and I realized that, Herbert capturing whatever was happening in the mid 60s. We've been in this test since my entire life. It's not like it's just happened in this last year. Silent Draco, the nuclear threat was advertising marketeer overplayed. If the bomber doesn't get through, it doesn't occur. Well, my father, I mentioned him a lot, having my cat die, who he gave me the cat. I had a fight with my father in the 90s over the reevaluation of whether the nuclear bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were necessary. And he was of the generation that believed that it was absolutely necessary to drop the bombs in order to end the war, right? And I think that you could say that was his kind of this mask lockdown moment, that they absolutely believed that those bombs were necessary to save everybody. And we've just lived through a version of that. It's like it's absolutely necessary to lock down the society and destroy the businesses and cripple the children's learning, because otherwise more people will die. And you recognize the structure, the shape of that particular kind of claim. Casey, Gibson's Hacksaw Ridge was brutal. I haven't watched that one, so I don't know. Turin Flang, the South Americans committed the worst genocide in human history. There have been a lot of genocides in human history. The Mongols were pretty effective at wiping out large cities. This is maybe one day Kilts and I can do an episode where we're talking about this kind of historical repetition. There's all like we're living in a unique moment of human history because every moment of human history is unique, and then we're also living in repetitions. I don't know what this meme was about. It's like why did they turn dark? Critically ill Wuhan doctors wake up to find their skin turned dark after beating coronavirus on the verge of death. I don't remember what that was about, but it's this sort of weirdness of different kinds of things that came out of this time, like the willingness that people had to cover themselves up, swathe themselves in plastic. What does the amnesty even mean? I mean, it's like I think this is the problem for war, right? When a war is over, everybody says, "Oh, we need to stop and forgive everybody that was on the opposite sides," and then the historians come along and say, well, we do need to actually understand how we ended up in this conflict, and yet they're continuously similar and seem to be able to repeat themselves regularly. Mike 1000, hard to face the horror of having made the wrong decision. What's interesting is we make the wrong decisions constantly. I mean, I can easily end up in tears over the mistakes that I made growing up and the choices that I made, and how can I, and they ratchet back to, this bad decision that I made when I was 12. And you're like, how do we not make bad decisions? Needs to be the moment where we end up on our knees before the cross saying, I'm a sinner. And so, go the Atlantic article saying, we want to just forget about it and go move on. Saying, no, we none of us get to forget about it, because we all made mistakes. Somehow I made mistakes in the course of the last couple of years. Maybe I could have done things better. Maybe I you don't know. It's like to have this premise that you're not going to then shouldn't be examining how you made your choices is silly, I think. Great meme again. Well, you guys sent the memes in, so I want to show you the ones that we chose. The religious, the degree to which people are able to recognize that this whole exercise was on the level of religious belief, and why, I don't know what these characters are called, but the smug guy saying, "You're not fooling me. I know you use hell to scare people into submission." Well, yeah, and he's saying it to the priests with a mask on. There's literally no reason you guys would ever lie. You have absolutely nothing to gain. Talking to Fauci and is that Gates and Biden. Yes, it is very interesting which version of either authority or hierarchy or trust we're willing to accept and not willing to accept. And one hopes, certainly with the religious authorities, we've examined our souls well to choose the right one. Buzzsaw Bears, have you or anyone else read 1984 and watched the movie? I found the movie so close to the images represented in the book. I haven't read the book since college, so I maybe I need to read the book. And I think we had a Big Brother meme somewhere in the group. Samuel H., if we don't have the personal regular confrontation with our own wrong decisions, we can't as a society sees it. But I think Samuel, you have another thought in there. Buzzsaw Bear, Rachel, did you get these from Fox's Best? Probably not, since I haven't seen them. No, I made a plea on Social Galactic and in Telegram for people to please send me memes, and then Kilts and I chose the ones that we wanted to use as we were talking. This is my absolute favorite because, of course, it's a corgi. But I will say, watching Vox do his meme review, either I'm judging on the basis of his commentary, and then he says the number, and then I'm usually gonna say what I got my Jeopardy number right in there, or maybe I'm good at picking memes and I pick the same ones Vox does. I'm not sure which it is, but we're gonna go with day 18 of lockdown filled the dog with helium as just my favorite because it's dogs, right? Silent Draco, state replacing church in that meme, value the body and not the soul. Yes, and I have, of course, written in my scholarship a lot about the problem of, the way the Middle Ages are told as the church as totalitarian and oppressive. And we're probably in our history discussions going to get to when I talk about the Inquisition, and we explain why that's another of these vending machine stories. So the vending machine takes over from the church as a guide, obviously, and we need to work on that. But we'll go back to the okay, so this one with all I'm saying, I got 3 polio vaccines in a year and still got polio. I'd start asking some questions. I am now reading a lot, and we were trying in this episode, we wanted to talk about this social experience that we've been through, but the problem with where medicine has gone and the degree to which we bought into the snake oil in modernity is, one, things that we're reading about for Draco Alchemicus, and two, it's all been snake oil. Definitely. So here we have the helium dog, who is the best meme ever because they float. And back to the amnesty. So we made it. Okay, we made it through Um, Turned flame. There were times when thousands were sacrificed a day for hundreds of years in many civilizations. The phenomenon of human sacrifice, I think, is needs we need to look at that and meditate on it a lot. I mean, abortion clearly was. It's Anne Hathaway is coming out right now with a, a a claim that we explored in Centrism Games about these Hollywood actresses saying it was worth it because I sacrificed my child for my career. I mean, that is straight up a decision to kill another human being in order for to have a particular earthly outcome for yourself. So we're still doing it. It can be very easy to be saying, well, look, the Spanish come in and save the people that the Aztec were using as their sacrifice source, but then the Spanish turn around and introduce, plantation encomienda systems for extracting labor, and the mines that the Spanish set up are famously quite brutal. The English, of course, help with the stories about the Spanish and the degree to which they make sure that the Spanish look like the good guys. History is one long exercise in trying to figure out whether or not the story that you're being told is the propaganda version or the record action or probably what actually happened in the end. Human beings seem to be very clearly capable of enormous brutality against each other. I mean, I say I'm Christian because I recognize that indeed only God can take that on, carry the sacrifice, and short circuit the impulse. Somehow we have this impulse to murder other human beings with the idea that it'll be of our benefit. And the Romans certainly did that. I mean, they did that with crucifixion to humiliate and quell slave revolts, but they also do it in their games, their gladiatorial games, which is the Spartacus story, right? He's a gladiator. He's trained to kill in the ring and they did that very nicely in the movie too, the Spartacus movie. It's like these are religious rituals. The Romans are going to have murderous combat as a religious offering to the gods. So we talked about, Kilts and I talked about this last time with my pirate ancestry. You don't nobody gets out with a story in which we're unreservedly the good guys. That I confess, some years ago to more maybe Daniel Hannan kind of National Review version of we're the good guys because Western Civ. We don't actually get that version either. We're just sinners. So, Silent Draco, love the helium dog. Yeah, I remember seeing that one at the time, and that kept me happy. The helium was there. Buzzsaw Bear, how does one stay faithful when it seems evil keeps prevailing throughout centuries now? I think, Vox talks about that really well. It's we live in a fallen world. Now, I am kind of sleep deprived and sad from my cat, and therefore did not do my homework as well as I should have for my class in Angels and Demons. But we did read a book this past weekend on the free will and the fall of the angels, the fall of the rebel angels in 13th and 14th century scholastic philosophy. And you would think that these guys, they're highly logically trained. They're reading their Aristotle. They're doing their dialectic. They know how to make strong syllogisms. They could not solve it, which is how we end up with nominalism, which is maybe yet another episode for a stream. I'm feeding you lots of topics that you can tell me whether you want to hear more about. The problem of where evil came from, at least in scholastic dialectic, was not solvable. They could not figure out exactly why in the instant he was created, Lucifer turned away from God. There's a kind of asymptotic division of, well, it was this instant. No, it was the second instant after he was made. No, there couldn't have been an instant after he was made. When could he turn? There's no moment when he could. You could do it in a story form, and say Tolkien does in the Ainulindale when Melkor turns against the themes that Luvatar has proposed. But logically, God created everything good. No, there should be no sin. It's and yet I think it's also theologically just as impossible to say that God made the evil, or that, you know, evil has equal reality with God's goodness. I would say Aquinas was smarter than me, but he didn't solve it, so I'm not sure. The battle is ongoing, and I think that, you know, from our perspective, the correct answer is Christ came to save us from this, and he has given us in his you know, offering of himself to us the way out if we serve him. And there is a sort of practical level of there. It's like evil is real, serve Christ. But the why the evil is there, yeah, we can do another Casey, R.I.P. Sophie Cat. Yeah, I know kind of the moment she died, because I was watching her breathing get shallower and shallower and shallower, and there was a moment when she just went, and it was this morning. She was sitting next to me. Turn flaying. Satan was made to rebel, in my opinion. It doesn't work to make Satan made to rebel, because then you make God the source of the evil. And you know, that it's good to be made with free will and to have choices. That makes more sense. That we want to be able to choose to go with everybody in our society, rather than have to stand up against the evil that's being had. We get that in a practical, like within the game level, but from the game outside design level, other than it makes life more exciting and we get to level up and, you know, be tested. And God does seem to, I mean, the scholastics talk about this, how God uses the angels, the fallen angels, to test us. And Satan, you know, Job is given Satan comes and asks, can he test Job? And God says yes, right? So there's these weird stories that philosophically are actually very difficult to parse. And as I said, the book we were reading was by Tobias Hoffman, and it's, you know, the free will and the rebel angels. And as far as I can read it, he's, you know, Hoffman's a great expert on the scholastics and worked very carefully through all of their proofs, but they parse and parse and parse, and then Occam comes along and says, nah, that works. You end up with nominalism. And the problem of solving why that there is evil is real, why there is evil is harder to explain. Yeah. So Busselbeer, sorry to hear about your cat. Get some sleep, and thank you for your stream. Thank you, Busselbeer. Silent Dragon says, free will comes to mind, beings with the choice to magnify God or turn away. Jay, otherwise how could you say what is good without something evil to compare it with? Silent Draco, long discussion on this will ensue. Buzzsawbear, Jay, you say good can't exist without evil, but it seems there is much more evil these days. So, you know, I would say maybe we're more aware of it. I mean, one of the things that we're learning is how much the evil that we're experiencing has been with us for a long time. And generationally, I think we need to continually become aware of it. Children are born innocent. We're born with original sin, but also in innocence, which I do also accept the description. I believe Vox is, maybe Owen has given it. It's like, why do people prey on children to try to turn them to sin? Because their innocence is so great. I mean, also children's attention is so immediate and intense. Adults are not as good at paying attention to each other. Each generation has to learn it anew, and each generation has to fight it. I don't think I actually believe that the evil is greater now than it has ever been, except insofar as there's more people that we are dealing with. But the world's been evil for a long time. Silent Draco, we might have to wait for that day to get the answer. Yes, very likely. Casey, we're more aware of the evil. The information age assures that. Well, and interesting that we're more aware of the evil, and therefore it can't hide, right? So we're in this new light, the light of the internet that we're traveling along in the fiber optic cables of light, and all of this light shining on our sin is hopefully helping more of us turn to Christ. So, well, I'm now aware that I've been here as long as we tend to promise, and I'm enjoying talking with you all about the question. But I promise you, I can't answer it right now, and I'm curious to see how you all continue to talk about it. So maybe we should, yeah, well, we can definitely to be continue on this. Where does evil come from, and why is it? But don't despair. I'm always in this situation of being weirdly joyful in the midst of all of the sorrow, because I am, if nothing else, a great reader and child of Tolkien's hope that we are in the story that the light is shining on, even when we lose our kitties. So thank you for the memes. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for being part of the community that stood up against this generation's trial, and may we continue to learn from it. So good night, everybody, and see you next week on the Mosaic Arc.